Good evening and welcome to Conversations with Lothrop. This is Richard Lothrop and I'll be your host for the next number of minutes. Tonight we're very pleased to have with us William Jindra, who is an Oberlin resident and a lieutenant in the Avon Lake Police Department. Bill, it's great to have you here.
Thank you, Richard.
A chance to share some thoughts with you about police work and about yourself, of course.
Well, thank you.
First, would you tell us something about your background?
My background, I grew up in Avon, so I'm from the area. And I went to community college after high school and went to the Sheriff's Department. And that's where I met Robin Zavatsky, and we got married, and that's how the Oberlin connection comes in. And once we were married, I moved here and really like Oberlin. It's a great town.
Now, she was on the Avon Lake Police Department once, was she? Or was
she was there for a while started as a dispatcher and then a part-time officer on the road. But she was a juvenile officer as a deputy sheriff, and that's where we met in 1973.
And what were you at the Sheriff's Department?
I was a deputy sheriff on the road.
Sheriff too. And let's see, let me ask, you've had what, 21 years in police work now?
About 23 now
23 total. 20 at Avon Lake, something like
19
that.
there.
19 there.
Yes.
So you've had sort of a varied experience.
Yes, I have. The Sheriff's Department was very interesting, and I also worked for about 2 years in private security for a company in Cleveland. So I've had kind of both sides of the coin there.
What attracted you to police work?
Well, my dad retired from Rocky River Police Department, so I grew up with it, and I think I was always interested because of him, basically, and that's how I got started in it. He didn't really encourage me one way or another, but he didn't discourage me. Although some of his friends tried to, they said, look at something else, but he just said, well, make up your own mind, and eventually that's where I ended up.
So he had some influence on this decision, obviously, from early on.
Oh, yes.
Is he still alive?
Yes, he is. He's 87 years old and still
following your career with interest?
Yes, he is.
Does he still give you advice?
Once in a while he'll, he'll say something, but not too much. It was interesting, a few months ago, or almost a year ago now, I got a call from a woman in New York working on the Sam Shepard case, and his name is associated with that case, and she called thinking that I was he, and I said, no, you've got the wrong guy. But
wrong generation.
Yeah, I said, he's a little bit older than I am.
So did they talk then?
Yes, they did.
Good.
Yeah.
Let me ask you, now that you've done it for 23 years, has it met your expectations?
Yes, I think it has. There has been some disappointments. I think in the later years now, I see more effort towards trying to do something for the victim. I think in the early days, they really didn't think about that all that much. And that's very important because people are traumatized by crime, and to have the support system for them to rely on is very important. They are going into a totally foreign situation when they end up going to court or dealing with the police and things like that. And we're so used to doing it every day that we don't often think of that. Now they have the victim witness program in the county, and the state has the program. It's very helpful, and it's a great resource for us to deal with.
That's especially so, I gather, in assault and rape and similar types of crimes, isn't it?
Yeah, very much so. They're just very valuable in helping to deal with the victim and being there and supporting them so that they feel more comfortable through the process.
How would you say that in the 23 years police work has changed?
Well, I think it's probably changed in a lot of ways. One of the biggest ways, I think, is affected everyone else too. It's the availability of information because of computers. Now, in the old days, when you wanted to run a license plate, you'd call into the station, and they had actually a book. They'd look up, and they got updates like weekly on the book for the local registrars. Now you just call in, it's all computerized, and you get everything instantaneously. criminal histories and things like that. Within 5 minutes you can know what the person's been involved in for the last 20 or 30 years. It's very helpful.
That would be helpful if you were in a cruiser at night and you want to know who's in that car, wouldn't it?
Yes, very much so. In the old days, you more or less had to rely on your instincts, and now it's more, you're able to tap into the information right away and know what's going on.
You usually do that before you get out of the cruiser?
We always try to run the plate before we get out in traffic stop situations, and during that process, then the dispatcher would be checking on what information they would have on the occupants of the vehicle. If there's a warrant outstanding or the car is stolen or something like that, that should come back almost instantaneously to alert the officer. There's also a new program in Ohio called COPS. It's for officer safety. And if a person is involved in a violent crime or there's an alert out for them where the officer safety is an issue, they send out an additional alert on those type of things through the computer system.
Good. And we were speaking there generally. Has it changed much in Avon Lake? Anything beyond what you just said?
Well, I think for Avon Lake we've grown tremendously over the last 20 years, residentially and business-wise. I think our situation has changed in the fact that we used to have some more violent type crimes than we do now, and over the last 20 years that's changed more. We're dealing more with thefts and things like that. We have an occasional violent situation, but not as many, and I'm glad to see that. That's a great change for us.
Is that because of the type of population?
I think so. I think so. It's more, probably a more affluent community, and things have changed in the, the type of people that were coming there before to commit crimes for whatever reason aren't coming out. I think when the freeway opened, there was a lot of people from Cleveland that would come out to see what they could do, and they've realized now that we're as alert as Cleveland is about what they're doing, and they're finding that even though they come to the suburbs to commit their crime, they're still getting caught, so they're not coming out as often.
Tribute to the police department.
Well, I think the information in general, yeah.
What attracted you to the Avon Lake Police Department originally?
In the 70s, it was when I worked at the Sheriff's Department. That was the premier law enforcement agency in the county, according to everyone I talked to. I knew several of the officers, and they encouraged me. One of my friends from the Sheriff's Department went over in '77, and he called me and said, you really ought to think about coming over here. And based on that, I took the test and did go there.
So you could almost have a deputies reunion and hold it in Avon Lake.
Just about, yeah. Just about.
Tell me something about the makeup of the Avon Lake Police Department. How many people do you have?
We have 26 officers. That would include the chief of police, full-time. We also have 3 full-time dispatchers, 2 secretaries, and we have about 4 or 5 part-time people.
And are you the only detective, or is there more?
No, there's 3 people in the adult side of the Detective Bureau and 1 person in the juvenile side. The commander of the Detective Bureau also handles juvenile crime and oversees the juvenile side. But I should tell you that I recently rotated back to the uniform division. Like
I think you'd said you'd hoped to do,
I was going
to do that. Yes.
Yeah, just last week.
Some culture shock there, or our shock?
It's an adjustment. Yeah, but I'm enjoying it a lot. And in fact, an Oberlin boy, Dwayne Streeter's taken over the Detective Bureau, and he's doing a real fine job.
Good. And I won't ask you if the uniforms still fit. I
had to buy new ones. Yeah, I think they shrunk in the closet.
Yes, they tend to do that somehow. And I guess I read somewhere that you have a new police station in the offing over there?
They're working on that. I think the city administration and council were a little shocked. They were predicting a $5 million expenditure for a combination police department, court, and jail facility. And the estimates have come in a little over $7 million, and they're taking a little harder look at it.
Or maybe they can do it in stages or something of that sort.
Well, they seem to think at this point that they can do it without going to the taxpayers for any additional money. So if everything goes the way they plan, they should break ground about next year at this time.
Good. Oberlin was able to do that without going to the taxpayers. And
yes,
so,
they were.
And that time, that was the state of the art.
Yes.
And I don't know. I guess people are still coming and looking at it,
yes,
from what I hear.
When we were considering building ours, Oberlin was one of the first places we came to and looked at.
How big is Avon Lake now?
The population's about 16,000. It's a long community in that it runs along the lake, and it's bordered on the south by the railroad tracks, and it's between 7 and 5 square miles. We have a CEI generating plant there. The Ford motor truck, the Ohio van plants, part of it's located in Avon Lake, and we also have the B.F. Goodrich chemical plant there. So it's a good industrial base and a lot of smaller manufacturing plants.
And somewhat of a bedroom community, I gather, also.
Yes, and I think the vision was pretty good in that the industrial side of the community, like Oberlin here, is isolated to an industrial area, and then the residential's in a separate area, so it's laid out fairly well that way.
Good. What are the most frequent categories of crime that you face on a day-to-day basis?
Oh, probably the most frequent would be theft-type offenses, and that could be anything from somebody stealing your bike to somebody stealing something out of your house as an invited guest or a worker or whatever. Had a case last year where there was a $25,000 ring stolen out of a house by the cleaning service, and that's considered in the theft category. Domestic violence, unfortunately, we probably have about 70 cases of that a year.
Is that rising gradually?
I think so. I think it's
nationally, at least.
Yeah, and I think part of it is the focus on the awareness, and the more people are reporting it than before. I think perhaps before it went on, but it wasn't as reported because women weren't encouraged to report it. Now they are, and I think it's a good thing that it's documented, and there again they have a lot of support groups for battered women.
And one of the things that I didn't know until rather recently is that there's a battered men's problem also.
Yes.
Which men don't like to talk about, obviously.
That's for sure. Yeah, and I've seen those type of cases, and you're right, they really don't want to report that, and that's unfortunate.
Let me ask you this. We hear, see in the media, read in the media, hear on the street that police work is getting more and more frustrating. Would you say that's true, or over-exaggerated?
It may be a little over-exaggerated. I think certainly another change in law enforcement over the last probably 10 years is more openness. We have open records laws now, and pretty much people can come in and look at things. If it's not an ongoing investigation, once it's done, the records are open, as they should be. And I think that frustrates some people because, they don't like to have that openness. And I think it's important that we do, because we are expending public money, and the only way you can look and to see if we're doing a satisfactory job is to see what's going on and review those records.
Well, let's see. What else can we ask you here? Could you tell us about the basic requirements to become a police officer today?
The basic requirements are at least 21 years of age, and obviously a clear background, no criminal convictions of a serious nature, and good health. Eyesight doesn't have to be 20/20, but it has to be correctable close to 20/20. And there's an entrance exam that measures intelligence and also a physical agility requirement that people go through.
And does that vary from city to city, or is it pretty basic? Or?
It's pretty basic. Most cities do it that way, but it varies slightly, and one agility may be a little different than the other.
We're just about ready for a break, believe it or not. Let me ask you one other question here before that. Could you tell us what the basic police training is like? What kind of thing? If somebody came into the department, say Avon Lake, what would they expect in the way of training? How does that work?
Right away, they would go off to basic police school if they didn't have their certificate already, and that's in the neighborhood of 16 weeks in a facility. We've been sending our people down to the State Patrol Academy in Columbus.
They live down there.
They live down there. They're allowed to commute home on the weekends. And it's a pretty strenuous course to go through, both academically and physically. And then once they come back to our department, we have an in-house what we call field training officer program, and they're assigned to officers on a rotating basis for about 12 weeks to get the in-house training, get acclimated to geography and the way we do things. And at the end of that, if the FTOs feel they're ready, then they're put out on their own under the supervision of a sergeant to see how they do. If they don't feel they're ready yet, the program's extended for a couple of weeks or whatever it takes.
Now, if you're lucky, you get somebody who's already trained.
Yes,
Sometimes
yeah,
that
cities
happens.
like to do that because it saves money. And more young people are coming to us already with the certificate, and it does save time, and you know, we can get our people online quicker. It's helpful.
Does college work help? Somebody
Yes,
said college.
very much so. In fact, I'm kind of astounded by the number of college graduates we're getting now. Back when I started, that wasn't as prevalent. And now, most people are coming to us with a 4-year degree already. We picked up a guy a couple of years ago that already had his master's. So college is pretty important. The community college here has a great police science program, and it's very good in preparing you for what would lie ahead as in
Would that take the place of the State Patrol program? No, they still would have to do that.
Still would have to do that.
Okay. Why don't we take a quick break, and then we'll come back and talk about the FBI Academy.
Okay.
Okay.
When Norm Abram heard he was coming to HGTV, he grabbed his favorite shirt and headed to the new Yankee workshop to build something special. We proudly welcome Master Carpenter Norm Abram and the new Yankee Workshop, the country's longest-running and most respected woodworking program, to home and garden television. When you're ready to tackle those big landscaping projects, there's only one place to turn: Home and Garden Television and Breaking Ground. Join hosts Cisso Doyle and John Knox as they guide you through all types of landscaping projects. Plus, meet the architects who designed them.
I try not to change anything too much, so everything tends to look very, very natural.
Whether your project is big or small,
we're laying the groundwork for great landscaping.
Watch Breaking Ground.
Welcome back with our guest, Sergeant William Jindra. I can't say detective anymore, Sergeant. And Lieutenant, I'm sorry. You're making it worse by the moment here. We don't strip you of everything, for heaven's sake.
That's right.
Let the record show as Lieutenant, no longer detective. You've done your sergeant bit.
Yes,
we won't demote you here. I'm sorry about that.
That's okay.
The phone number is 775-1635 if you'd like to talk to Lieutenant Jindra, ask him anything. Yeah, in the meantime, we'll talk a little bit about the FBI Academy at Quantico, Virginia, correct?
Yes.
And as I understand, you recently got a chance to be on that program. Would you tell us something about what it is?
It's an 11-week program for officers in a promoted position, and they come from all over the world. Each class is about 250 people, and you apply. You're nominated by the head of your agency, and then you apply to attend. They do a background investigation, and all the coursework there is college level through the University of Virginia, and it's all police related, either budgetary and command type things or investigative type things. And I attended a year ago. I graduated June 15th of '96, and I studied extensively in criminal psychology and investigative type things, crime scene handling, communications, interrogation, things like that.
Can people vary then in what they want to talk about or discuss
Yes.
or to work on?
Yes, they can. It's set up pretty much like a college program where you get a booklet of what's available, and then you pick. You have to pick one course from each of the areas. They also have. It's graduated whether you have a master's or a doctorate or whatever. You could do some independent study if you wanted to go there for 11 weeks and set up your own program. You could do that with their approval.
And it's an 11-week program.
Yes, it is. And intertwined in that is the physical aspect of working out and running and nutrition and healthier living. It's a holistic program. Very well organized, and I know one of the first days we were there, they put us in this big auditorium, and all 250 of us were assigned a seat. And they said, well, we'll be passing out your schedules shortly. And I thought, well, this is really going to take a while. They came down the line of seats, and each person had a stack for that group of seats. And as they passed them down, your schedule was the top schedule, and you took your schedule and passed it on. It was just, the organization was just fantastic. Yeah. The campus was very nice. It's on the Marine Corps base there, and it's laid out so that you don't have to go outside for classes. Everything's enclosed, but it's a long walk, and I think they do that in order to. That's part of the physical training program.
You stay there over weekends and so forth?
Oh, yes.
You don't come home or anything?
I was fortunate enough to get home 3 times, but some of the people, especially those from out of the country, weren't that fortunate, and some of the local people would offer to take them home for a weekend now and then. And
how many states and countries did they come from? Did you ever get a breakdown on that? Or
I did.
Widespread?
It was from all over. I think there were 48 states represented, and about 18 foreign countries, if my memory serves me correctly. I was fortunate enough, my roommate was from London, England, and he works in Scotland Yard in what they call organized crime, and that entails kidnapping for ransom and things like that. And it was fascinating. I think one of the best learning experiences there was in the evening hours, just sitting around informally talking to one another and saying, well, if you had this kind of problem, what do you do? And it was very, very fascinating.
And I probably shouldn't ask this, but did you ever ask your roommate if he knew Inspector Morse?
In fact, we did. Yeah. We talked
a big
about.
Favorite of mine.
Yeah, we talked about Inspector Morse and a lot of the. I enjoy those programs also, and Inspector Dalgleish, things like that. Yeah, and he was very well versed on those, no doubt about it.
They watched them too, I assume. Yes.
He said Inspector Morse is a good old bit of coppering, is the way he put it.
In spite of some dunderheads above him, which I hope is not really a part of the yard.
Well, I hope not.
We won't get into that. As I understand, you have quite a bit of networking afterwards, which is a valuable thing.
Very valuable. In fact, we get a booklet yearly of the graduates. And I was assisting with a background investigation for another agency here in the county, and the person we were looking at was coming from Texas, Department of Public Safety, and it turned out that one of the women in our class was a lieutenant in internal affairs for the Department of Public Safety in Texas. So all I had to do was call her and got the information I needed to make sure the person was a quality candidate.
That's great.
Yeah.
How difficult is it to get into this thing?
It's fairly rigorous. I applied, I think, in '92, so I had almost a 4-year waiting. Like I say, they do a background, and you also have a medical screening where you have to do an EKG and a stress test and all that. So it's pretty rigorous.
Because some of these people may be a little bit out of shape for that type of thing.
Yes, yeah, and there are requirements. We had one fellow, unfortunately, towards the end of the program, we had what was called the physical challenge, where we did the Marine Corps obstacle course in about a 6-mile run, and he was finishing his run and had a heart attack and died.
No.
So it was very unfortunate.
But kind of a cloud over the whole thing for
It did.
yes,
It did. But there again, they were, even though they don't, that doesn't happen very often. They were very well organized. We had a memorial service at Quantico for him, and he was from Rawlings, Wyoming, and they had the service back there, and it was pretty well handled. They had grief counselors and everything available for us.
Because our police chief here, I believe, went through the B.J. Jones went through that several years ago.
He is a graduate of the National Academy also.
So he could give you some pointers ahead of time, did he? Or
yeah, I did. I talked to several people who had gone through previously just to get some idea of what to expect, and that was very helpful. It was very helpful for me to talk to those people, and because when you consider that for 11 weeks you're moving away from home, living with strange people that you don't know, it is kind of an intimidating experience at first.
Sure, like going to college as a freshman, isn't it?
Absolutely, it's like dorm living. You know, you have a roommate, and then we shared bathroom facilities with the two people next door, and it made for some pretty close close situations at times.
I think all of us remember the trauma of the first, or all of us have gone through a freshman year in college, you know, the trauma of that first week.
Oh, sure. And
wondering how in the world they paired up as they did.
And you pray for a good roommate.
You certainly do. Well, let me see. What was I going to ask? I was going to ask you about Avon Lake having community policing. Does it have such a program?
No, we don't. We have not gone to the community policing program. I think it's a good program, and there's a lot of merit to it. We have not done that. You know, I think that goes back to a lot of the old-time communication between citizens and the police force, so that they would know what's going on. People are much more ready to call and give information or talk to a police officer if they know who they are. And that's what's so helpful in that program, because then they have a contact person. I got a call at work today from a lady who had some information on we had theft of guns from an apartment, and she was hesitant to talk to anyone else because she was afraid for her own safety, rightfully so. But she knew that I would protect her confidentiality, and those type of contacts are very important.
Because I know I ask because I know they've talked about this here in Oberlin. I think have tried it a little bit in quadrants and so forth.
Yes, they have.
And we talked a little bit about teenage crime. Not a serious thing in Avon Lake, fortunately.
As the statistics, as you were pointing out, over the past year, they've gone down almost by 100 cases. You know, it's interesting. When I was on the road before, back in probably 1981 or 82, I was dealing with kids on a regular basis, and you begin to think, you know, that kids are pretty bad because you generalize, I think. Sure. I went to the high school graduation, and out of the senior class, I think I only knew 4 kids out of a class of probably a couple hundred. And I thought, you know, there's a lot of decent kids out there doing a lot of decent things. Last night I was at the band banquet for the high school here in Oberlin, and there again, there's a lot of decent kids doing a lot of decent things. I think, unfortunately, in the media and other places, the negative is the thing we hear about so much, and we begin to think, you know, oh, this is just terrible. You know, there are some isolated, just horrendous situations that you hear about involving juveniles, but I think we all need to remember that there's a lot of decent kids out there.
Most of them.
Most of them, the majority, yeah. I had an old detective tell me one time, he said, if you know about 3 or 4% of the population, that's the only people you really need to know, because those are the bad people.
That's the bad one. They can keep you going at times.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, they make you earn your money.
Yes, they do.
And the phone number again is 775-1635. We have Lieutenant Jindra in captivity for another few minutes if you would like to ask him anything or make any comments. Let me ask you what the public can do to assist the police. Or not do, maybe, to assist the police.
I think one of the frustrating things in police work is you'll get a call from someone after something has happened, you know, and it's happened a number of times to me. We'll have a burglary or something like that, and a day or so later, somebody will call and say, you know, I saw something suspicious there, but I didn't bother calling because I didn't want to bother you people. And I always tell them I'd rather handle 10 or 20 situations where it proves to be nothing than to have one go by where it was important and not get the call. People tend to wait to call because they mull in their minds, well, should I or shouldn't I? I think if you're concerned about something, you should call immediately, because the sooner the police are notified, the better the chances are that they're going to catch whoever's doing something or be able to resolve the situation.
Good. So they can be your eyes and ears.
It's absolutely true. The police force can't do it alone without the help of the citizens. They're just not going to make it.
Do you have a block watch in Avon Lake?
We have we had a neighborhood watch program for a few years, and we have the block watch for the kids, and that's a very helpful program.
Let me ask you a little bit about the relationship of local police, Avon Lake, Oberlin, any local, to, let's say, first the county sheriff, and then maybe comment on the state highway patrol. How do you relate to these agencies?
Pretty closely. Of course, the computer system leads, which stands for Law Enforcement Automated Data, that's controlled and managed by the State Highway Patrol. The detectives meet here in the county on a regular basis, at least once a month, and share information on cases. And it is amazing how often we'll have a situation in Avon Lake and we'll go to a meeting and mention, well, we've had this problem, and you know, 3 or 4 other departments will say, well, we're having the same thing. So we do share information. It's very important because criminals are very mobile these days. And the State Patrol, we meet, the chiefs also have an association. They meet monthly and they share information, the State Patrols at that.
So you all help each other?
Oh, absolutely. You know, I mean, if we have a county-wide emergency response situation, the Sheriff's Department has the Drug Task Force on a county-wide basis, and they have officers from the cities that come and work on that, and it's a great program for us because our people can get experience in a much wider range of cases that way.
And as I understand it, our State Highway Patrol is not technically a state police. There's a differentiation there, isn't there?
That's correct. They have police powers on state highways and things like that, and state facilities, state property. So, and they have police powers on the highways, but they're limited off the highway. Let's say if you lived out in the township and had a burglary, the State Patrol is not able to come out and take your burglary report. That's up to the Sheriff's Department.
Could they handle a traffic accident on county road?
I believe they do, yes.
They do. Wouldn't have to be a state highway necessarily.
And if there's a crime connected with that, such as drugs or guns or whatever, then they obviously have jurisdiction to handle those things.
You mentioned drugs. Is that a problem, growing problem? Or is it leveling off, or where are we on drugs?
I think it's been pretty steady. It's kind of strange depending on where you're at. In Avon Lake, we've had a problem recently with LSD. You know, everybody else tells you, well, LSD is a thing of the past. We just arrested 3 people last year for trafficking in LSD.
Lysergic acid, is that right?
Yes.
How did I do? Pretty well.
Not too bad.
That's all I know about it. I want to hasten to add.
Yeah, it's attractive, and unfortunately, it's attractive to younger kids because it's very inexpensive. They can get probably what they call a hit of acid for between $3 to $7, depending on where the market is at that time. So that's a problem. A lot of marijuana, things like that, cocaine, crack cocaine. I've talked to a lot of people we've arrested for other crimes such as theft or forgery or whatever that have been involved with crack cocaine, and most of them across the board have told me that they thought getting into it was going to be like marijuana, where they'd be able to smoke a little bit and then leave it alone. And they said that first hit they took, they were hooked almost instantly. And it's pretty scary, pretty scary stuff.
I'd just like to very quickly ask you about minority candidates. Does Avon Lake have an effort to get minority candidates at all?
We don't have an ongoing program where we're trying to recruit. We do have one of the things that I would like to see happen is for us to get a female officer. We don't currently have a female officer on the road, and I'd like to see that happen. You know, for whatever reason, we don't get a great turnout of minorities for our test. I don't know if they're just not interested in coming to work for us.
Oberlin doesn't either, and I think that's something that worries our Civil Service Commission here and our department. And I don't think anybody's quite sure why this is the case, unless it just isn't attractive to minorities for some reason as a profession.
I think that's a possibility. It's something that we certainly need to take a look at and figure out what the problem is so that we can attract people. Because it's important that your department should reflect the community you serve.
Well, we're just about at the end of this. Let me ask you three final questions here. Knowing what you know now, would you go into police work again?
Yes.
Yes. That's fine. And here's an important one. Would you recommend this to young people?
Yes, absolutely.
High school now, for example?
Absolutely. In the Detective Bureau over the last 5 years especially, I've been involved in the process of screening new applicants and interviewing. And you know, I'm always encouraged by the young people I see and the quality. I think we've really gotten some fine candidates and some great new officers coming on board.
Good, good. Any final thoughts you'd like to share with us?
Oh, I think just that to say again that you know, the police need the people's support, and the best thing they can do is to call if they see something suspicious. And if you can get to know an officer and feel comfortable calling that person, by all means do it.
And let the police sort it out later.
Yes, yes.
Are the police pretty good in keeping the call? I've heard people tell me that they didn't want to call because they didn't want the people they were calling about to know it.
Right.
Is that a problem?
It can be a problem. You know, I've had people call in Avon Lake and say, I don't want to give my name. And I always say, okay, well, I'll listen to what you have to say, and I can't guarantee that we can take care of the problem, but tell me what's going on, and I'll see what we can do. And you know, if it's a noise situation or something going on in the neighborhood, a lot of times we'll go down there and sit and listen to see what we can hear ourselves. And then we basically become the complainant, as opposed, because it is a hard situation. You know, if you're going to complain about your neighbor, you certainly don't want them knowing.
Well, Bill, we thank you so much. We do have a souvenir of this show, our mug, our Conversation with Lothrop mug, and there it is. And we thank you again very much for being with us.
Thank you, Richard.
And thank you so much for tuning in, and we will have another show for you at the end of June, the last Thursday in June. Until that time, this is Richard Lothrop saying thank you very much for joining us, and good night.